Hello. If you ever want to test your emotional resilience, try running a high-end restaurant while simultaneously realizing your wife is sleeping with your head chef. It's a fun little exercise in maintaining a professional demeanor while mentally picturing your spouse getting their extra side of sauce in the walk-in freezer. But hey, some guys would lash out. Some would cry. Others would go full dramatic meltdown and set fire to their wedding photos. Me? I decided to handle it with a little more creativity. Let's back up. I'm Ethan Carter, 38, a chef and owner of a successful fine dining restaurant in New York. I've built this place from the ground up, starting as a nobody washing dishes in the back of a greasy spoon, working my way up through years of insane hours, cuts, burns, and yelling at teenagers who think frozen shrimp is fresh seafood. Finally, after a decade of grind, I opened Carter's Table, a sleek, intimate spot that has made it onto some must-visit lists and even got a feature in a major food magazine. I thought I had it all: a thriving business, financial security, and a wife who supported me. Enter Madison, my now ex-wife, a woman who seemed to adore the restaurant life. She was there for the grand opening, handled some of the PR, and always made a show of being part of the journey. It was cute, in a fake influencer kind of way. But things change when your business becomes a well-oiled machine, and you don't have to be there 24/7. Suddenly, the woman who swore she understood your passion for food starts complaining that you don't have enough passion for her. Classic. Now, I don't consider myself the jealous type, but when your wife starts treating your head chef, Liam, like some misunderstood artistic genius, alarms go off. This is a guy who once burned a creme brulee because he got distracted by his playlist. Not exactly the culinary messiah, but hey, Madison had a thing for rugged guys with tattoos and an allergy to responsibility. The signs were subtle at first. Lingering glances. Private conversations that ended the moment I walked in. The casual way she'd laugh at his dumb jokes. The kind that would get an eye roll from me but seemed to make her melt like butter in a hot pan. But the confirmation came when I checked the restaurant's security cameras late one night. I had installed them after a few incidents of food theft. Never did I expect to see my wife in my restaurant, at midnight, on my counters, with my chef. At that moment, I could have gone full Gordon Ramsay meltdown, but I didn't. Instead, I had a better idea, a revenge that would be served exactly the way I preferred. On a plate, beautifully presented, and with just the right amount of spite. Revenge, much like a fine reduction sauce, requires patience. It has to simmer, develop layers of complexity, and, most importantly, be served at the perfect moment. I wasn't about to throw a tantrum or storm in like some scorned soap opera character. No, I had something better in mind. First, I needed to keep my cool. That meant walking into work the next day like I hadn't spent the previous night watching Liam, a man whose idea of fine dining included reheating day-old risotto, defile both my wife and my kitchen counter. I kept my routine, greeted the staff as usual, and even nodded to Liam when I saw him prepping for the dinner rush. He had no idea that I knew. That was important. A successful revenge requires the element of surprise. If he saw me coming, if Madison got suspicious, the whole thing would fall apart. So I played my role. The hardworking chef, the dedicated husband, the oblivious idiot. But behind the scenes, I started making small, deliberate moves. First, I adjusted the menu. Nothing dramatic, just subtle changes. A few key items swapped out, a couple of new ingredients introduced. I made sure these were items Liam would have to work with directly, things he wasn't quite familiar with. See, Liam was talented, sure, but he thrived on routine. Give him a filet mignon, and he'd plate it like a pro. But throw a curveball? He'd fold like an overworked soufflé. Next, I sifted through our reservations list. Our restaurant catered to an exclusive clientele, the kind of people who knew their food, who could taste the difference between aged for 6 weeks and left in the fridge too long. I made sure we had a few VIPs booked for the coming weeks, food critics and influencers who could make or break reputations. Then, I started tweaking the kitchen dynamics. I built my team carefully over the years, and they trusted me. They also knew that when I asked them to keep something quiet, they did. I subtly hinted that Liam was struggling, mentioning to a few trusted sous chefs that I had concerns about his focus. "Just watch him," I said, keeping my tone casual. "If you notice anything, let me know." Finally, I made sure Madison had no idea I was onto her. That part was easy. She had grown comfortable, cocky even. She had convinced herself that I was too busy, too distracted to notice. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still sent me texts asking about my day, as if she hadn't spent the previous evening tangled up in someone else's apron strings. I responded as I always did. Polite, normal, predictable. And then, I waited. Revenge, after all, is best when it's slow-cooked. Patience. That was the key. I wasn't about to let my emotions take the wheel, no matter how badly I wanted to throw Liam into the deep fryer and watch him sizzle. No, this had to be controlled. Methodical. If I played this right, neither he nor Madison would see it coming until it was too late. The restaurant business is a high-pressure world, and when you introduce chaos into a well-oiled machine, it spreads like a grease fire in a poorly ventilated kitchen. The first step? Undermining Liam's confidence. See, chefs have egos. They thrive on praise, validation, the belief that they are irreplaceable gods of the culinary world. Take that away, and you start to see the cracks. So, I made small changes. At first, they were so subtle that Liam didn't even notice. I tweaked ingredient ratios ever so slightly, adjusting the salt levels in our pre-prepared bases, changing out one supplier for another under the guise of better quality. That Wagyu beef he swore by? Replaced with a slightly different cut from a lesser-known farm. The butter blend he used for his signature sauce? Swapped with one that had a marginally lower fat content. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make him question why his dishes weren't landing the way they used to. I started dropping suggestions to the staff, casual observations in passing. Liam seemed a little off his game last night, didn't he? You notice how the last couple of orders weren't quite up to standard? I planted the seeds of doubt, knowing full well that in a tight-knit kitchen environment, rumors spread faster than a viral TikTok trend. Next came the stress test. I had quietly arranged for a well-known food critic, someone whose palate was sharper than a boning knife, to visit on one of Liam's busiest nights. Normally, I'd give my staff a heads up before a big review. This time, I let him walk into the fire blind. The critic ordered a selection of Liam's best dishes, the ones he took the most pride in, and I made sure that every single one had just enough of an issue to make the critic question his abilities. The steak? A fraction overcooked. The reduction? Slightly broken. The seasoning? A whisper too aggressive. Nothing catastrophic, just enough for a 3-star review instead of 5. Enough to make Liam spiral. The next day, he was in his own head, second-guessing every decision he made at the stove. He triple-checked his mise en place, hovering over his sauces like a nervous student about to fail a final exam. I could see it in his posture, the way his hands weren't as steady, the way he watched me out of the corner of his eye, probably wondering if I had noticed. Oh, I noticed. That was the point. Then, I went for the personal attack. I started being overly accommodating with Madison. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make her uncomfortable in the best way possible. I suddenly became the perfect husband, attentive, affectionate, making grand gestures. I made sure she woke up to breakfast in bed, made spontaneous dinner plans, sent her flowers at random. The kind of attention she used to complain I never gave her. And the thing is, she hated it. Because guilt works in funny ways. Instead of feeling grateful, she felt trapped. The more I showered her with love, the more she had to remind herself that she was sneaking around behind my back. Every kiss I placed on her cheek, every dinner I prepared, was like a silent accusation. I took it a step further. I started inviting Liam to our house more often. Friendly, cordial, like I hadn't spent hours watching security footage of him defiling my kitchen counters. Come over for drinks, I'd say. Madison and I would love to have you. He couldn't say no without looking suspicious, and so he came. And I watched the two of them squirm through an evening of forced small talk while I played the role of the oblivious husband, all smiles and casual laughter. The best part? I started leaving little breadcrumbs. A comment here, a question there. You ever get that weird feeling like someone's watching you? I'd ask out of nowhere, watching their expressions flicker for a fraction of a second before they forced themselves to act normal. Or I'd casually bring up loyalty, trust, how devastating it would be to find out someone close to you was lying. I just can't imagine, I said one night over dinner, staring straight at Madison as she choked on her wine. It was beautiful. They were unraveling, and I was just getting started. It wasn't enough to make Liam question himself. No, I wanted to watch him crumble, to see the confidence drain from his eyes every time he picked up a knife. I wanted him haunted by doubt, by the creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as talented as he thought. And Madison? She was already drowning in guilt, barely able to hold up the facade anymore. But guilt alone wasn't enough. No, she needed to feel the weight of what was coming, that slow, suffocating dread of someone who knows the walls are closing in. So, I escalated. I introduced a mystery critic challenge for the kitchen staff, hyping it up as a way to keep them sharp, to test their skills under pressure. Every night, a dish would be randomly selected for evaluation and judged by a secret panel of customers who would leave private feedback. The staff loved it. Liam? He hated it, because I made sure his dishes got the worst reviews. Comments like lacking balance, too salty, overthought, underwhelming became a daily torment, reinforcing the idea that he was slipping. And because it was random, he couldn't protest. He had no idea that I was the one orchestrating every bit of it. At home, the pressure was mounting. I doubled down on affection, making Madison's life a waking nightmare of perfect husbandry. Romantic weekend plans, spa days just for her, notes left in her purse with sweet little messages. I even took up morning yoga with her, pretending I wanted to be more in tune with our relationship. It was psychological warfare, and she was losing it. She barely slept, barely ate, her once flawless facade slipping every time I touched her hand a little too gently, held her gaze a little too long, made her feel like the monster in her own marriage. Then, the kitchen disaster happened. Friday night, packed house, full reservations. Liam was already on edge, triple-checking every plate. His nerves shot from weeks of bad luck. I made my move. Mid-service, I switched the labels on 2 critical spice jars. One contained our usual black truffle salt. The other? A nearly identical container of activated charcoal powder, a harmless but extremely bitter and overpowering ingredient used for decoration in a few avant-garde dishes. It looked the same, smelled almost the same, but one pinch too much, and a dish became inedible. Liam, panicked and sweating, sent out a VIP dish, a $120 Wagyu special, seasoned with enough charcoal to make it taste like burnt rubber. The table? None other than a Michelin scout, who had secretly reserved under an alias. By the time Liam realized what had happened, the damage was done. I watched the meltdown unfold. First, the blank look of confusion, then the flash of realization, the sickening moment where he knew that he had just ruined something big. He started blaming the kitchen staff, yelling at the sous chefs, his voice rising in panic as he tried to salvage his reputation. But the scout had already made their decision. A quiet exit, a word to the maitre d', a simple, polite nod of disappointment. That was all it took. The next morning, a single 1-star review appeared on an exclusive industry blog. Short, scathing, and absolutely devastating. Madison read it over coffee. She turned pale. "Wow," she muttered. I scanning the words, this could ruin his career. I shrugged, sipping my drink. Yeah, that would be awful. Liam showed up to work shaken, quieter than usual, head down. He barely met my eyes. And that's when I knew. He felt it. The curse. The creeping belief that his career was slipping through his fingers, that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't good enough anymore. That the gods of the kitchen had turned against him. And Madison? She knew it too. She knew something was happening. She just didn't know I was the one holding the knife. There's an art to revenge. It's not about rage. It's not about screaming in someone's face or flipping tables like a reality TV meltdown. No, true revenge is subtle. It simmers, it builds, it coils itself around the target until they don't even realize they're walking straight into their own destruction. And my final act? It had to be a masterpiece. Liam had already lost his confidence in the kitchen. Madison was one wrong glance away from a full-on breakdown. All I needed was the perfect setting, the perfect moment to tie it all together. So I created one. I planned an exclusive VIP tasting event, an invite-only dinner featuring a new, highly anticipated menu. The guest list? Food critics, industry insiders, and a few of Madison's influencer friends. People who would make sure the world knew what happened. I made sure Liam was in charge of the night, building him up just enough to make him believe this was his moment of redemption. Then, I set the stage. I started by creating a custom menu, one that would tell a story. Each dish had a subtle, double-meaning name, things that seemed innocent at first glance but held a much deeper sting. Loyalty is a delicate balance, a precariously stacked tower of puff pastry and delicate seafood, just waiting to collapse at the slightest misstep. Bitter aftertaste, a gorgeously plated dish featuring a hidden burst of unexpected bitterness, a nod to the lingering taste of betrayal. The unfaithful pairing, a duo of ingredients that looked perfect together but completely clashed on the palate, symbolizing two things that should have never mixed. I let Liam run the kitchen, but every ingredient, every instruction, every minor detail was engineered to fail. I made sure a delicate sauce was just a second too long on the heat, causing it to break. I arranged for the main course to mysteriously go missing, forcing Liam to improvise under pressure. I even made sure the soufflés collapsed before they could reach the tables. The guests noticed. The murmurs began. And then, the grand finale. For the final course, I personally walked out with a special dish, plated like a piece of art, set on a glass-covered serving tray. I tapped my glass, gathered everyone's attention, and smiled as I spoke. This last dish is a very personal creation of mine, a reflection of my recent journey. Then, I lifted the glass cover, and there it was, a pristine, flawless dessert. But not just any dessert. This one was served on a white ceramic plate, engraved with the restaurant's security footage stills, high-definition images of Madison and Liam. The room went silent. Madison's face drained of all color. Liam went completely stiff. The guests, half in shock, half in disbelief, stared at the plate, then at them, then back at me. I believe food should tell a story, I said casually, setting the plate down in front of Madison. And this one? This one's about truth. The cameras were out. People were whispering, some outright gasping. One of Madison's influencer friends already had her phone up, recording everything, realizing that she had just stumbled upon the scandal of the year. Madison stood up abruptly, knocking her chair over. Liam looked like he wanted to vanish into thin air. But I wasn't done. I turned to my guests, smiling. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have one last course to prepare. It's called a fresh start. Then, I untied my apron, placed it neatly on the table, and walked out. I had already sold the restaurant a week prior, a silent deal behind the scenes. My name was still on the building, sure, but not for long. The restaurant would continue, but without me, without Liam, without Madison. And as for my ex-wife, I made sure she found the divorce papers waiting at home, neatly placed on the kitchen counter. The same kitchen she had disrespected. By the time she realized she had lost everything, I was already on a plane, en route to a well-earned vacation. Some say revenge should be sweet. I prefer mine elegantly plated, meticulously planned, and served in front of an audience. If there's one thing people love more than fine dining, it's a scandal with a front-row seat. And that night, I made sure everyone had one. The room was already buzzing, gasps spreading like wildfire as the engraved security footage plate sat between Madison and Liam like an uninvited ghost at the table. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, the desperate scrambling for an excuse, an explanation, anything that could save them. Madison's reaction came first. She shot up from her seat, knocking over a glass of champagne, the liquid spilling across the pristine white tablecloth. Her eyes darted around, scanning the crowd, as if looking for an escape route. But there wasn't one. Not this time. Ethan, this isn't what it looks like, she stammered, her voice shaking, but her eyes already guilty. Classic. The oldest excuse in the book. I folded my arms, exhaling a laugh. Oh, it's not? Because to me, it looks exactly like what it is. But please, Madison, I'd love to hear your version of events. Silence. The entire restaurant was watching, guests pretending to sip their wine but hanging on to every word. Liam, still seated, looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. His face had gone from flushed to ghostly pale, beads of sweat forming along his forehead. I could almost hear the panic screaming in his head. He knew there was no getting out of this, but he was too frozen to react. That's when the whispers started. Soft at first, then growing louder as Madison's influencer friends exchanged glances, nudging their phones under the table, probably already typing up posts, recording snippets, setting the stage for the next viral drama. That's when Madison snapped. "This is cruel," she hissed, her voice wavering between anger and desperation. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Ethan, but this is humiliating." Oh, so now she cared about humiliation? Funny. I shrugged, keeping my voice calm, measured. Humiliation? You mean, like what happens when a husband discovers his wife sneaking around with his head chef? Like that kind of humiliation? I tilted my head, pretending to think. Because, Madison, trust me, if you're feeling embarrassed right now, it's only a fraction of what I felt watching that security footage. Liam finally spoke, his voice hoarse, cracking under pressure. "Look, man, I cut him off with a raised hand, never breaking eye contact. "Liam, if I were you, I'd choose my next words very, very carefully." His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Nothing. He had nothing. Because what could he say? That it was a mistake? That it didn't mean anything? That he hadn't just torched his career in front of the most important people in the industry? No excuse would save him now. "I trusted you." My voice was quieter now, lower, but somehow it carried more weight. The room went dead silent again. I built this restaurant from nothing. I built my life with Madison thinking she had my back. And this is how I'm repaid. Madison's hands were shaking. She was spiraling. "We can talk about this in private, Ethan," she pleaded, her voice cracking. I shook my head, letting a cold smile creep onto my face. "Oh, no. You lost the right to privacy the moment you brought this into my restaurant. The moment you turned my kitchen into your personal getaway. You made your choices, Madison, and now you get to live with them." Then, I turned to everyone else in the room, raising my glass like a man delivering a toast at his own wedding. "To new beginnings," I said smoothly, the final nail in the coffin. And with that, I walked out, leaving them to clean up their own mess. Behind me, I heard Madison's choked sob, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. And then, the whispers turned into a full-blown murmur, a flood of phones out, texts being sent, cameras capturing the fallout of the year. By the next morning, the restaurant industry knew. By noon, the internet knew. And by evening? Well, let's just say that by then, Madison and Liam's reputations were cooked beyond repair. Revenge doesn't end the moment you walk away. It lingers, like the bitterness of a burnt espresso shot or the cloying sweetness of an over-reduced sauce. And as I left that restaurant, my restaurant, for the last time, I knew one thing for certain. Madison and Liam weren't just ruined in that moment. They were ruined forever. The fallout hit faster than I expected. By morning, the entire restaurant industry was talking. Food bloggers, industry insiders, even a few celebrity chefs had caught wind of what they were calling the biggest scandal in fine dining that year. Social media exploded with clips from that night, grainy videos of Madison's meltdown, Liam's ashen face, and my calm, collected exit. People weren't just watching it. They were analyzing it, breaking it down like it was some kind of documentary on betrayal and poetic justice. By noon, a prominent food critic had released an article dissecting every excruciating detail. How a once-rising chef had collapsed under pressure. How a businessman's betrayal was unveiled in a plate of carefully planned revenge. How a wife's affair had become the most talked-about moment in the culinary world. By evening, the consequences were irreversible. Liam was fired, not by me, of course, since I no longer owned Carter's Table. But the new owners didn't want the stain of a public scandal attached to their restaurant. Who would? When people looked at Liam now, they didn't see a talented chef. They saw a cautionary tale, a man whose career had gone up in flames in front of an audience. He tried to bounce back, of course. Took a job at a small bistro in another city, hoping to escape the backlash. But the internet doesn't forget. Every time his name appeared on a menu, the reviews came flooding in. People remembered. And that was enough to ensure he would never reach the heights he once thought he was destined for. His career was done before it could even restart. And Madison? She had it even worse. Her influencer friends? They turned on her within 24 hours. The same people who used to hype up her power couple relationship with me were now posting vague social media stories about betrayal and karma. A few even publicly distanced themselves from her, suddenly deciding that maybe they had always known she wasn't as genuine as she pretended to be. But the real downfall? Her sponsorships dropped her. Turns out, brands don't like being associated with public humiliation. The partnerships, the paid posts, the travel collaborations, gone. In the blink of an eye, her entire curated lifestyle fell apart. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she tried to reach out to me, sending long, guilt-ridden texts. I never read them. Blocked her number, her email, everything. She wanted closure. I left her with silence. Because that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't get a happy ending. There's no heartfelt apology that fixes it, no amount of, "I made a mistake," that rewinds the damage. She lost the life she built with me. And I was already moving forward. With the money from the sale of the restaurant, I took a long overdue break. Traveled. Ate at the best restaurants without worrying about food costs or margins. Sat on a beach with a drink in my hand, letting the sun bake away the last remnants of the stress they had caused me. And the best part? I had a new restaurant in the works. A fresh start, under a new name, a new location, and with a team I trusted. One that would have nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with the ghosts of my past. So if you ever wonder whether revenge is worth it, let me tell you this. It tastes even better when it's slow-cooked. Bye-bye.